Hey, this is Meridith Elliot Powell. You know what time it is. It is time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. And today I've got one of my favorite people. I tell you, I was on LinkedIn the other week and I thought, oh my God, I haven't talked to Ian in ages. And there are so many nuggets in the times that I have interviewed Ian Altman before that I use those nuggets on a regular basis in my own business. So I feel like I have invited Ian back on here, partly to help my clients, but more to help me because I know I'm going to have great takeaways. So let's start the show and we'll dive into this incredible conversation about how to modernize the sales process so that you can compete more effectively. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Meredith, thank you so much. It was such a generous introduction that I feel like people's expectations now couldn't possibly be fulfilled.
Not true. I got to tell you, one of my favorite lines that I use from you, and I use it all the time, is the line that, we found when we work in your industry, these are the problems, and this is how we have helped people. What a great line for an opening cold call. And it has been so effective for me. So, Ian, where I want to start is talk a little bit about how you got into sales and what really your path has been to create the business that you have now.
Well, it's interesting. The first job I ever had in sales, I got fired from because I wasn't good at it. I was a college student, had no training, no concept of what I should be working on. And then, years later, I started my first business and had to figure this stuff out. And we grew a business to a couple $1 billion in value, which is not something you do routinely. And through that process, we picked up different sales strategies and approaches. We brought in different outside experts. And when I exited that business, I was trying to decide what to do. And I didn't want to build the same type of business over again. And a bunch of friends said, well, why don't you help other people grow their businesses? And I didn't know there were people like us who existed who help other people grow their businesses like this. And I started this business in, I guess it was 2010. And the book I'm best known for, Same Side Selling, I co-wrote with a guy named Jack Quarles. And as you can probably guess from Jack's last name, Quarles, he spent two decades in purchasing and procurement. So we talk about the adversarial traps that pit buyer and seller against one another. And through that time, I've done a lot of research with over 10,000 executives around the world around how people make and approve decisions. See, my academic background is in quantitative economics and decision science, which is a really nerdy topic to study, but it meant that I wanted to get into the science of how people make decisions and then build a methodology around that.
So let me ask you this. What was the switch? So you go from getting fired to moving into sales where you build $1 billion company, because I really think that's fascinating. I mean, I have the same kind of background. I started out in sales. I was awful at it. Why do so many people, or what was it for you? What about sales were you not good at and why?
I think that most people have been taught things in sales or have observed things in movies or just from other people. And we've been taught a lot of bad habits. And the key switch for me and the switch for most of my clients is showing up as someone who is there to solve instead of showing up as someone who is there to sell something. So early on, I would call people up and say, here's why you should buy my stuff. And it didn't resonate with anybody. And then going forward, I learned, no, what you have to figure out is, hey, if you have one of these problems like our other clients have, we have a great track record of helping them solve that. If you don't have this problem, there's nothing for us to talk about. And it changes the mindset from rejection to one that says, well, either we have a good fit or we don't. And if we don't, it's okay. We just saved each other a bunch of time. Yeah. And that makes it so you can show up with authenticity. And it's also why for many of my clients, what we find is that people who have no sales background whatsoever, in less than a year, become the top performing salespeople in that organization. People say, how is that possible? It's like, well, because they're curious and they're actually genuinely showing up to help serve people, not just try and sell something. And when they do that, they happen to sell a lot of stuff.
I love your the book that you're most known for, Same Side Selling. I just love one of the greatest things about it, I think, is the title. Because when you talk about training and things for salespeople, I know that I really failed at sales for a lot of the reasons you said. So much of what I was taught was about me versus the customer. It was how I could convince the customer to, they never said to do something that wasn't right for them, but I was trying to win. And that never ever felt good. And it didn't feel sustainable, even if I could pull it out for a month. So what I'm curious about is when you talk about modernizing the sales process, because you and I have been at this for a long time. And what has changed in the sales process lately? And what does it mean to modernize the sales process?
Part of it is that very approach of taking a current view rather than a prior view. So there are many people who teach concepts where either sales is a game or sales is a battle. And so in a game metaphor, you have a winner and a loser. In the battle metaphor, the loser dies, and then we wonder why it's adversarial. And instead, we use a puzzle metaphor that says, look, if my puzzle pieces fit with yours, we have something to talk about. Now, when it comes to a more modern approach, guess what? It used to be that you would call somebody, their phone would ring, they had no idea who was calling. Then you had caller ID, then you have voicemail. Now you have people working remotely. If you can't capture and earn someone's attention early in the process, then it's a waste of time. So people who used to measure things like how many phone calls are you making, how many conversations, those aren't meaningful data points anymore. Instead, now we have to combine digital marketing, we have to combine content marketing strategies, video with outbound, as well as a method for attracting clients for inbound inquiries. Because what we really need to be doing is instead of saying this is the product or service that we offer, we have to think to ourselves, what is this person trying to solve? And can I talk about that? So if you can say to somebody, look, if you're facing one of these 2 or 3 problems, half the time we talk to people, it turns out we can help them, which also means half the time we can't. But if that's something you're facing, I'm happy to talk to you about it and see if we might be able to help. What that does, it disarms the notion that your sole interest is in the sale, but instead you're focused on, can I help you solve something? And can you and I achieve the outcome that's meaningful? Because if we can't, if you look back, if we talk about modernization, 30 years ago, if you didn't deliver for somebody, they might tell 3 or 4 people they know. Today, they'll tell millions of people they've never even met before. So it's critical that we deliver great results and outcomes for our clients and only attract the people we can help the most.
Where has instant gratification come into the sales process and being easy to do business with?
I mean, if you're difficult to do business with, you're requiring your client to jump through a bunch of hoops and hurdles in order to become your client. And if they really want to do business with you, they'll still figure it out. But it makes it so that all of a sudden, being easy to do business with, being able to quickly deliver for people is incredibly valuable. I had someone who contacted me yesterday and said, hey, we want you to speak at this event. And my team got them an agreement within an hour. And the agreement came back signed a half hour later. Now, 20 years ago, we would have said, oh, we'll get you an agreement by the end of the week, and then a week later. But now it sounds funny, but and our friend Jay Baer talks about this as well, where time is so important.
Yeah.
We're used to now, it used to be, okay, I call a taxi and I wait for them to show up and maybe they show up. Now I use Uber. Not only do I get instant notification, but I know exactly where the car is. I know what they're driving on. Like all these things become elements that we just take for granted now that weren't possible before. So to be timely, to be efficient with people is really critical because they don't have time to waste anymore. It used to be they would put up with salespeople who weren't efficient because they couldn't get information otherwise. Now they can get information through other channels. So if you're not easy to do business with, if you're not truly looking to help them, then you're going to end up in the vortex of evil called voicemail and you'll never reach them again.
We own a place down in Charleston, South Carolina. I was down there with my husband last week and we were making reservations to go out to dinner. Now, even though it's summer, restaurants are hurting like crazy. I mean, with inflation out there, the price of going out to eat, people have, made some cutbacks. And I was looking at restaurants we love online and one has stopped taking reservations and you have to call if you want to get in there. And I thought, I'm not doing that. I mean, I'm like, you just made this so easy for me. And that understanding that the customer has moved into the position of control. I love what Jim is saying here. The first 5 seconds of a cold call that is hyper relevant. I think relevancy is a word that has become so much more important in today's marketplace. But I feel like I feel like it's almost vanilla in the sales place. What do we mean by being relevant? How does a salesperson become more relevant?
Well, so if you're talking about yourself, then it's only relevant to you, maybe your spouse, and probably your dog,
Mhm.
right? So that's a limited universe. But if we're talking about other people we help, then all of a sudden it changes things dramatically. So when Jim mentions this idea of the first 5 seconds of cold outreach are pivotal, it's you mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation. If I reach out and say, when other manufacturers, when CTOs at other manufacturing companies have reached out to me, it's usually because they're trying to solve one of two or three problems. But I don't even know if you're having those. And if you are, if I'm the right person to help you solve it. Now, all of a sudden, someone says, wait a minute. So you work with other people like us, and you're not yet sure if the solution you did for them would work for us. Well, let me see, because I have that same problem. Now, if they don't have one of those problems, then they probably aren't ripe for a conversation now anyhow. And that's the biggest challenge that people face is they think to themselves, well, but if they don't care about these three things, what else might they care about? And what you have to really look in the mirror and say is, but if they don't have one of these three things they need to solve, are they going to make a decision to work with us in the short term anyhow? No, it's not a priority. So save yourself and save them the hassle and say, you know what, let me check back with you in a few months, see if anything's changed. And their priorities may have shifted, and you can share relevant content, but it's all centered around what problem are they trying to solve, not what it is that you're trying to sell. And that's the biggest pivot that people have to make.
Yeah, when I started using your line, I had gone from an opening cold email, used to be, Meridith Elliot Powell. I worked quite a bit in your industry. I'd list some people that I worked with to opening up with, I work quite a bit in your industry. These are the top three issues that we see. We've got some innovative solutions on how to solve them. I'd love to know if we could help you. It it just moved the opening from like, who cares if I've worked in your industry? That's a little relevant, but I understand the problems of your industry. And I love what you said. I really want to underline this. I got a call, that actually inbound call to me, from a credit union, big, huge credit union out west. And they were attracted to the fact that I work in the uncertainty space. But when I got in there and started having the conversation, the person who called me, when I got to the decision maker, the CEO, she didn't really feel that the financial services industry was going through much uncertainty.
Yeah.
Now, I could have argued that all day long because I'm like, lady, you got your head in the sand. But to your point, that was a waste of my time and energy. And there's a
Yeah.
thousand other people that I could call on and I could be more successful with.
It's a different approach that basically gets us to acknowledge that our time is very valuable. And if we start wasting it with people who aren't a right fit, it means that we don't have the right time to help the people who are the right fit. And it's changing that mindset that's really critical, that a lot of people overlook. And we have to be okay with the fact that everyone's not a good fit for us all the time. And in fact, less than half the people you meet are a good fit. Here's another interesting thing. People in sales have often been taught to ask questions like, what keeps you up at night? What's your biggest issue? The problem with that is that when I ask executives, I'll say to them, so true or false? The biggest problem you can help your client solve is usually something that's a blind spot for them.
Yeah.
And people say, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if you ask them what's your biggest issue, it's probably not going to come up as even their biggest issue. It's going to come up as the most recent issue for them. And it's not likely to be something you can help with, as opposed to if you lead with, here are the types of issues people like you come to me to address. Now, all of a sudden, I'm having a conversation about if you don't have one of these issues, probably not much for us to talk about. But if you do have one of those issues, you're instantly interested, and we're incredibly relevant at that point.
Yeah, I had a CEO say to me when I was doing some research for a book on salespeople, he said, I'm really tired of salespeople coming in here and asking me what keeps me up at night. He said, I need a salesperson who can walk through this door, tell me what keeps me up at night, and there are three ideas on how to solve it. He said, I need a partner. I don't need an investigator. That really was such a mindset shift for me. One thing that Jim says here about parse out information from the biography and relate it back to the vision. Our friend Ross Bernstein said, put a text on a group chat that we had where somebody had reached out to that sells books had reached out to Ross and said, you should think about writing a book. Now, if they'd read Ross's biography, he's written over 50 books. I mean, not doing that research. Let me ask you this. In today's modern marketplace, what do you think, if you had to skinny it down to three of the biggest mistakes you are seeing sales people make today, what do you think those are?
The three biggest things that I see, one is an over-reliance on automation. So similar to what you're talking about there, they're using tools like LinkedIn, they're using other tools that could provide great insight, but they're not really using it. Every single week, I get someone who sends me a note that says, well, as an author and coach, I know that you often struggle with sales, so let me help you. And I'm thinking to myself, do a little bit of research. Or like you said, my favorite one, have you ever considered writing a book? And I usually respond, another one? Because it's like, how many more do I need to write in order to not get that piece? So the first part is over-reliance on automation. The second thing is that if I ask people in sales, why do your clients need whatever it is you're selling? The answer usually revolves around features and benefits of the product. The top performers, however, will say it's because they're facing this problem, or that problem. And they're totally dialed into what the actual problem is and why people need to solve it. And then the third biggest issue is that people confuse activity with accomplishment. Mm-hmm. So they look at how many phone calls, how many meetings, this and that, instead of being laser focused on how you're going to get there. So what I encourage people to do is say, look, if your target is to hit $3 million for this year, what does that look like? Where during the year is it going to come in? What size clients are they going to be? What size projects will they be? What size sales will they be? Is that 3 $1 million deals? Is it 6 $500,000 deals? Probably not. It's probably 50 deals that are one size and 20 deals that look like something else and 1 or 2 that are those really big ones. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, so if you're going to achieve those numbers and that mixture, how are you going to attract the people in each of those categories? So what happens is people set a goal, but they don't define a roadmap of how they're going to achieve that goal. And so it becomes this phantom goal that says, okay, it's kind of like if I said, okay, I'm going to drive to your house, but it never occurs to me that I have to leave my driveway first, right? It's like, well, first thing you got to do is open the garage so you can get out. But people will say, oh yeah, I'll be there in a while. Okay, but you haven't left your garage yet, so you're probably not getting there. And that's what I think people often overlook.
We're sitting here doing this interview at a time when, inflation is at an all-time high. Nobody's knows what's really going to happen with interest rates, the economy. We've got a looming election year in front of us, which, will not only divide the country, but the outcomes could mean a dramatic, difference, which way it goes. Do you feel like the marketplace is more challenging for salespeople right now?
I think that in any point in time, we can come up with a myriad of reasons or excuses for why it's a hard time to sell. And we can also, in those times, recognize that the people who put blinders on to avoid those distractions and focus instead on what their clients are trying to solve often thrive and grow dramatically. One of the case studies that we share is a company called Dome Construction out on the West Coast. They were between 100 and 120 million a year for 3 years, and they were kind of stuck in that area, which is a good sized business, but wasn't where they felt they could be. And over the next 6 years, including some of the years during COVID, they grew to over 600 million by taking this more modern approach. Mm-hmm. And I think last year they did over 700 million, and I think they would have done over $1 billion were it not for COVID. So many people in their industry said, oh, with COVID, people aren't doing these projects. This is bad. That's bad. The dog ate my homework. There are all these different excuses or explanations that people have. And instead they said, okay, we're doing well, but we want to do better. We want to modernize the way we approach our clients and the way we grow. And they did it without hiring any additional people in sales. And they grew the business, sevenfold over the next 5 or 6 years. And they could have had a totally plausible explanation that says, well, it's COVID, so these internal construction projects aren't being done, but they didn't. And now I get phone calls from construction companies on the West Coast, and they say, well, in these certain markets, we used to do pretty well, and now this one company is eating our lunch. And I just kind of chuckle. It's like, yeah, I know who it is and I know why it's happening. And it's because you were making excuses while other people were seizing opportunities. And so I just think that, yes, we can be empathetic and say it's more challenging, but instead what we have to look at is say, okay, yes, it can be more challenging now. So what do we need to do to stand out so that we're not in that trap? So we don't get in the excuse game. I've heard people say, oh, well, the economy is really tough, so we're not going to invest in anything. Okay, but what if your competitors are investing and now they gain market share? You can wait forever. You think about it, when COVID hit, speakers like us, guess what? We pivoted to virtual.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people were rolled up in a corner in a ball saying, oh, all these events were canceled. And I said, okay, how do I create the best online experience for people? Because our clients still need to solve these problems. And that's the difference of how quickly can you react to these situations and solve the needs for your clients. And then regardless of conditions, you'll still thrive.
I feel like while the marketplace is more challenging, it's also a lot more open because most people do pull back. And I think customers remember who shows up when the economy gets challenging, because quite frankly, when the economy gets good, we're not selling, we're order taking.
Yeah.
Well,
and if you do a good job at figuring out how to sell when things are tough, then your clients remember, wow, when we were having a tough time, these people came in, they helped us figure out where we should focus our efforts. They solved something important. And the other thing to remember is this: when things are good, when times are really good, people can afford to make a mistake and recover. Yeah. When times are tough, they can't afford to make a mistake. And so if you're focused on people's results and ensuring they get the right outcome, all of a sudden in a tough time, you're a way more attractive option. The reason people come to you or come to me is because we have countless examples of success stories, and people say, okay, well, sure, there are people I can hire for much less than bring in Mayor or bring in Ian. But if I want to achieve these results, these are probably the people I need. And that's the difference. Is oftentimes when times are tough, people think, well, I'm going to lower my price. And the reality is, all you're probably doing is raising uncertainty. Because I've had clients saying, yeah, it occurred to us that the person who charges 20% of what you charge probably only charges that amount for a reason.
Oh, well, it is hard to believe we are coming to the end of this podcast. I always like to close it with two questions. You can answer them in either order. Number one, how do people find you? How do they find out about you? How do they find out about your sales academy and everything that you have to offer? And then when it comes to this uncertain marketplace, if you could leave our audience with one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice be?
All right. Well, the easiest way to find me is at samesideselling.com. On social media, it's just at Ian Altman. On X, I'm getting used to saying that instead of on Twitter, but on X, you can find me there. I'm not big on Instagram. I post something on Instagram once a quarter, just as evidence of life. But so people know I'm still alive that way. And in terms of the biggest piece of advice, hone in really well on the three biggest problems that you solve for your clients. Not everything you could solve for them, but in their words. If they were explaining to one of their colleagues what they're most frustrated or concerned about, what would it sound like in their words? And if you can get that articulated well, then when someone says, what do? You get to say, well, typically people come to me address one of these two or three major problems. And now you're talking about them instead of yourself. Yeah. And as soon as someone says, well, I'm interested in the second one, you're now talking about them instead of talking about yourself. And if that doesn't set you up to thrive, I don't know what will.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you said use it in their own words, because that is what that is what makes them really feel heard and really, really feel understood. Like, don't try to wordsmith it. Don't try to make it pretty, and just make it really, really relevant to them. Well, thank you so much for joining us for Thrive. It's always fantastic to talk with you. And I'm taking away a couple of nuggets that, again, I am going to use that will transform how I sell. So we will definitely have you back on the show again if you will come. And audience, we will see you right back here for another episode of Thrive and all the strategies you need to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage.